Yes, like Anna, 40 years of experience of working, but for me, on thyroid hormone. And it's because of this expertise that the French government asked me to sit on panels at the OECD to look at testing methods. And it was back in 2001, and I was so shocked by the lack of the way that the OECD was taking into account current knowledge about thyroid hormone signaling and the methods that were being used that I went back to the bench that very same day, and I started to work on developing an alternative method, and it led to the founding of WatchBrock. So it employs 10 people today, not as many as some people, industries represented in this room, but I declare my conflict of interest. So my next slide will cover the points that I hope to raise and cover in these 10 minutes. I want to get across the idea that thyroid hormone has been conserved across all vertebrates. Ever since evolution came up with the idea of making thyroid hormone, it kept it the same. It didn't change the hormone, it didn't change the receptor. And without thyroid hormone, you would not be able to understand me today, and I would not be able to speak coherently, because we all need thyroid hormone for optimal brain development. We no longer see cretinism, thank goodness. But we are seeing significant IQ loss in populations exposed to high levels of certain chemicals. And this includes pesticides. What we don't know is about the subtle effects. We are also seeing increases in autism. And like the IQ loss, I will try and provide arguments to link this to thyroid hormone disruption. I won't be able to in 10 minutes, obviously. But I want to insist on the fact that current testing is not picking up on the windows of vulnerability, notably early pregnancy in humans. We didn't know anything about the need for thyroid hormone in the first trimester of pregnancy 15 years ago. Today we know it. And we're not picking up on the changes, the subtle changes in brain architecture. The relative numbers of neurons and glials. Glial cells can be oligodendrocytes, they can be astrocytes. We're not picking that up. And the cost of inaction, as Inge-Marie has already insisted, can be, in terms of neurodevelopment, that was the real big fraction of these 150 billion per annum. So my next slide. Just to remind you, we don't see this today, but there are people I've met recently who knew about cretinism. They saw it. It was in the Swiss Alps, of course. Mark Twain wrote about it. The key idea is that without the right amount of thyroid hormone at the right time, a human baby becomes a cretin, and a tadpole will not metamorphose into a frog. Distinct physiological effects, but the same molecule, exactly the same molecule doing it. Next slide, please. And this is why, as I've already mentioned, we took advantage of this conservation across evolution, and we founded WatchBrock, and we used both fish and tadpoles to assess endocrine disruption. Next slide, please. The key point is that if we're looking for non-animal testing, these very young embryos, they're really at the in vitro, in vivo interface, and they are considered under current EU legislation as non-animal because they're non-feeding. Next slide, please. This is the key point, another key point, that you have triiodothyronine, which is thyroid, the active form of thyroid hormone in the top left feed. Yes, it's always the top left. And you've got a flame retardant below it. You've got PCBs to the bottom right. You can see that they've got a very strong homology with thyroid hormone. But in the top right, you've got PFOS, a surfactant, that's got absolutely no homology. So I don't need to tell you that you're not going to pick that one up with in silico testing of molecules for homology with the active form of the hormone. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, every time people look for chemicals in amniotic fluid, they find it. So it's not just a matter that every child born today is exposed to thyroid hormone disruption, it's conceived into that mixture. Pesticides, BPA, benzophenone 3, legacy pesticides, you name it. Tracy Woodruff and other people have documented this. I could have shown you the actual values. Perchlorate, nitrate, thiocyanates are present. Thiocyanates and nitrates are 10 to the minus 6 molar, for those of you that means something. These are all inhibiting iodine uptake by the fetus thyroid gland. Next slide, please. And immediately the next. Stay there. So it's come into the popular idea that the first 9 months of your life in utero are critical. We've all heard about the the developmental theory of adult disease, DOAD. We know that these developmental times are really critical, but what we didn't know until very recently, as I said, the first papers came out in 1999, we've got others come out much more recently, that early pregnancy, these first 3 months, the mother's thyroid hormone levels, and therefore we estimate as well that disruption of those thyroid hormone levels can have critical effects on the neurodevelopment of the child. Next slide, please. And this has indeed led to what we think can be linked to an unexplained increase in neurodevelopmental disease. This is the figures for autism. We can see that the latest data from the USA, it's 1 in 42 boys, and it's exactly the same diagnostic criteria, next slide please, as in the year 2000. So we've got less than 25% due to change diagnosis. We think it's very probable that there may be gene susceptibilities, but the gene studies aren't showing anything of real significance that take into account these figures. And I really want to insist on the idea that nearly half of the children in the USA that are diagnosed with autism have IQs of under 70. That ain't much. Next slide, please. And indeed, a recent paper took some very interesting data that I would love to discuss with you, if possible, later. They looked at data from the Victorian times based on reaction times, the speed of reactions, and you can calculate IQ from this. And they calculated that there was a 14-point IQ loss between the end of the 19th century and today. Next slide, please. What's the consequence of such a thing? Well, this is the sort of thing we looked at in that paper which I co-signed with, that was discussed earlier. A 5-point loss in IQ will result in 60% less gifted individuals across a population. Here we've taken a population of 100 million for the sake of argument. 100 million with a normal IQ distribution, you'll have 6 million gifted and 6 million the other side intellectually challenged. If you have a shift in the IQ, just 5 points, and this has been seen. It's been seen for iodine deficiency, maternal hypothyroidism, for PCBs, lead and mercury, organophosphates. It's been seen for flame retardants, and as many of the speakers have underlined, we have no idea of the additive effects. If you have this sort of 5-point IQ loss, your 6 million gifted goes down to 2.4. And the number of children and adults, which don't forget, brain development is irreversible. It's a one-way street. Once you started that way, you're going to stay that way. You're going to go from 6 million to 9.4. Next slide, please. And this is what we tried to estimate, because IQ, of course, is one of the best markers that we can actually, in the last 10 years, people have been able to look at prenatal exposure, and then you only have to wait 3-7 years to be able to measure it in the child. You don't have to wait for testicular cancer to develop or breast cancer to develop, and it's something that's quite well monitored. It's not, you're not going to fall into the trap of saying you've changed your diagnosis. IQ is IQ. We can debate how we measure IQ, but I can go through that with you. So most of the costs were related to neurodevelopmental disease and IQ loss, and the larger fraction of that was attributable to pesticides. And I want to insist on the fact that we only were able to have data, reliable data, for 3 major categories of chemicals. And I don't want to insist on how many there are out there. The pesticide story has been picked up by EFSA. To their honor, they've presented some very detailed and very good studies. And highlighted in yellow, I put there that they looked at 287 pesticides, and they found that 101 had thyroid effects on the thyroid signaling system. Next slide, please. And it's not surprising, given that in October 2014, that the OECD put out a special call saying we need better non-animal tests for thyroid disruptors, because the tests we have are simply not doing the job. And that's why I brought up the fact that the paper that I again co-signed with Stefan Schultz, and it's supported by industry actually, it's a HESI-driven initiative, where we looked at the possibility of using fish and amphibian embryos, as I showed you in the earlier part of my talk, to do this sort of testing. And I underlined already then that indeed these tests can be seen as non-animal tests. And my last slide just recalls in a quick that the European Parliament, we all know this, called for better protection of women, pregnant women and babies, and I really think it's time that we took this into account. Thank you for your attention.